Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. And today is the birthday of one of my very favorite composers, the great Richard Strauss. Now, Strauss was someone who I think continues to be very mischaracterized a lot. He was someone who helped to bridge eras, and not just because of his long life and when he was born, but because of his musical composition. He was someone that brought romantic music into the modernist age without foregoing the quintessential weight, depth, and beauty of Germanic Romanticism. He was reared on a cultural diet of Wagner, and Wagner obviously shaped all of European music, but particularly Germanic music, from his lifetime well into, frankly, the present day. Bruckner was somewhat older than Strauss. You can also see the sort of symbiotic relationship there. But Strauss lived well into the 20th century and composed right up until the end of his life. And his music, like I said, always had one foot in the romantic world of Wagner and Bruckner, but also in a world of his own, in a very modern world, in a world where there is dissonance, a world where there is chaos, a world where the modern machinery of mankind in this new electric and highly mechanized century was creating new forms of pain, new forms of opportunities, and new philosophical realignments. And all of that is without being insistent is communicated so directly in so many of his pieces, his tone poems, his symphonic poems like Also sprach Zarathustra, based on the book of Nietzsche, Don Juan, his mournful, elegetic, beautiful Tod und Verklärung, Death and Transfiguration, the wonderful Alpine Symphony, wonderful, wonderful music, one part bucolic, one part a sort of contrast between the bucolic world portrayed and the increasingly urbanized and mechanized world outside. And you can hear those sounds in the chords, in the dissonance, and even in the harmonies in which they resolve. You feel this tension of a world on the verge of change forever because while most of the symphonic poems we remember of Strauss were written either before or in the midst of the First World War, you could really feel in his music that the chaos and frankly the end of Europe as we knew it, unleashed by that World War of 1914, there were these interesting premonitions you can feel in his music. Now, after the war, he continued to compose so much music, including many operas, which really pushed the boundaries of what you could do in the Wagnerian Germanic opera form. One of my favorite, the Egyptian Helen, maybe one of his lesser known operas, has my favorite aria of all time, the so-called awakening scene from that opera. One of just absolutely perfect. Leontine Price did a wonderful version of it with Leinsdorf conducting in the 50s on RCA. Check that out. Absolutely beautiful. Now, Strauss, because he lived for a long time, saw music change around him. And some people have falsely accused him of being behind the times, which I suppose is something that you could unfairly, or maybe sometimes fairly, level at anyone who had a very long life in the public eye. But I would say instead that Strauss was consistent in both his modernism and his romanticism, and he didn't really feel the need to musically pander to either side, and that was true throughout his life. Now, his final great work were the Four Lost Songs, which are four of the most beautiful and moving songs ever. I mean, it makes listening to them makes you feel a combination of peace, sorrow, terror, conciliation and reconciliation all at once. Absolutely gorgeous. And the songs were written after the Second World War as a kind of elegy to his beloved opera house that was destroyed in the war. But it was really an elegy for, again, what parts of Europe survived the First War didn't survive the second. And so it was an elegy for the civilization that was really coming to an end in Europe, and things were moving on to a new world divided between the what I call the aerospace empire of the United States on the one hand, and the aerospace empire of communism, Soviet communism in particular, on the other. And between these two forces, the cultures of Europe tended to get rather swallowed up. So it was a mourning about that as well. In terms of the Four Lost Songs, Strauss didn't record them conducting himself, but the premiere was conducted by the great Furtwängler with Flagstad on soprano vocal, and that was from 1950, just after the composer's death. It's hard to find, but it is on YouTube. Check that out. As for Strauss's tone poems, he conducted them himself multiple times, and while some of these recordings, given the interwar era, are low fidelity, definitely check him out, his own versions recording, pardon me, conducting them himself. He was a very prolific conductor in his lifetime of both his work and others. And while he was known for his economy of style, he had brilliance that shone through in the subtlety. He wasn't one for sort of large and grandiose gesticulations on the podium, but his conducting was nevertheless nuanced and interesting, more rubato than some of the people who only listened to some of it expected. It was just really strong conducting. So check out him conducting his own pieces, and it will really sort of open up your mind to a lot of really interesting things about him. But of course, other great conductors of his music were, Furtwängler, Mengelberg, Böhm, Clemens Krauss, Karajan. You can't go wrong with any of them. So happy birthday to Richard Strauss, one of my very favorite composers of all time. As always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.